Thank you very much. Let me just get my slides. Oh, all right. Fab. So, first of all, thank you so much for having me. This is amazing. Who's been in the ball pit? I'm planning to spend all of tomorrow in there. I've got my hair crimped like it's 1985. I'm having the best time. I hope you are as well. I'm sure we've all seen our fair share of migrations in our careers, some, no doubt, more successful than others. If you've ever struggled with a technical migration, I'm here to tell you that you're not alone, because migrations are really hard. And it's very easy to start out thinking that it's going to be a straight line to the end, where everything's going to be better right away. But in reality, of course, it's often a lot more like this. An uphill path full of twists and turns and surprises. Unforeseen hiccups and bends in the road, interruptions that take away your focus, and what seems like a very short distance that actually takes a lot longer to cover than you might think. So I'm going to talk to you about the bends in the road that we faced embarking on a big technical migration, how we navigated them, and some of the lessons that we learned along the way. And I'm going to be talking to you about how to know whether you should be going up this road at all. My name is Sophie. I'm a staff engineer at Monzo Bank. We're based in London. I have a website. I occasionally write about tech, mostly just write about video games and gardening. And you can find me on various places around the internet. Now, Monzo is a bank that lives on your phone. We're big in the UK, where we started, growing in the US, and we're also launching in the EU soon. We've just opened our Barcelona office, which is very exciting. But as an app-based bank, our main product is just that, right? It's a phone app. But we do have web things too. We have a website. I hear that's pretty common these days. We've also got a web banking app for our business customers, where they can do things like view their transactions and manage their savings. But by far the biggest web app in our arsenal, I guess, is our internal tooling. And this is our customer service tool called BizOps. It's a big old React application, and anything that our customers need help with, our customer service agents can do through BizOps. Chat, email, calls, any kind of back office processes that they need to do to help customers. So as you can imagine, it's very complex. We recently migrated our web properties to Typescript. It took ages. This is actually the sticker that we got made after we finished. It took us just over 2 years in the end. I think it did come out pretty well in the end, but needless to say, migrations like this are not without challenge, especially in an organization of our size. So these days, if you want to write statically typed JavaScript, there's a very high chance you'll choose Typescript. For some people, it's kind of the only option these days, right? It's the most well-known way of adding static types to JavaScript, and it's developed by Microsoft. But when we started our web code base back in 2017, it wasn't quite as ubiquitous as it is now, and there was a viable alternative. And a few people have mentioned this today. And for people like us who are building in React in 2017, like Facebook's type checker Flow seemed like a really good option. At this point, it kind of seemed like TypeScript and Flow were basically the same thing. So we went for the one that we assumed would work best with React. Flow was built by the same people who built React, so it seemed like a very safe bet. Well, flash forward to 2021, and unfortunately, we knew we'd chosen the wrong option. For one thing, Flow was quite poorly maintained, but also because TypeScript was so much more popular, no one was writing Flow types for the libraries that we used, so it became really hard to keep things up to date. On top of that, the Flow server just crashed all the time, and we used Next.js, and they released a new version of Next with a shiny new compiler that we couldn't use because we were using Babel, which we needed to transpile Flow. Code itself wasn't that different, just a handful of syntactic differences. Flow files are JS files with a Flow annotation at the top, whereas TypeScript files have their own extension, .ts. We knew that migrating our web properties to TypeScript wouldn't be as simple as just running a code mod across the whole repo, though. For one thing, there was just so much code. We've got a big mono repo for all of our web properties with a ton of shared libraries and dependencies. And it can seem really intimidating when you're right at the beginning, and you feel like you've got this massive job ahead of you. Where do you even start? Well, in our case, we decided to start small. One day, a couple of our engineers decided they'd had enough. And so they decided to see what was out there in terms of migration tooling and scripts. And they wanted to see if they could migrate one package in our repository to TypeScript. And once they'd done that, they decided to see if they could get it building alongside everything else. Now, flow to TypeScript is a very well-trodden path at this point. I'm sure many of you have done the same thing. And in fact, a while after we started, Stripe open sourced their migration code. So with any technical migration like this, it's always worth seeing what other people have been doing to see if you can save yourself some time. You want to prove that this migration can work before you commit yourself to doing anything else, because if you try and get buy-in from senior leaders before you've even started experimenting with a solution, you run the risk of being shut down before you've even been able to do anything. And without a really clearly defined plan and timeline, you're asking people with very little context to let you focus on what they might see as a less important piece of maintenance work over your prioritized teamwork. So it's really important to have that space to experiment with something before you need to go and make a case for it. So time box that exploration effort and communicate your progress really clearly, and keep a log of any decisions that lead to you choosing a particular path or technology, because your future self will thank you for it. So really document the hell out of everything right from the start. For every new engineer who joins your team, you're going to want to get them up to speed with what you're doing and why you're doing it. I actually left Monzo in 2021, and I came back again in mid-2022. When I left, they were just starting to experiment with this migration, but when I came back, it was in full swing. And so I needed to get up to speed and understand what was going on, but luckily the team had put together this dedicated Notion page with all the information that anyone could need about what's going on, why are we doing this, and what the kind of stages of the migration were. Your documentation should cover every aspect of the migration, past, present, and future. You should treat it like a project, because of course your projects are all meticulously documented, I hope. But you need to make it really easy for someone with no context to understand, why are you doing this? How do I do it? Who should I speak to if I have any questions? So once you've decided to go ahead, who actually does the work? Should you have one team working on the migration and nothing else, or should you spread it across different teams? In an ideal world, you'd have one team who focus on the migration and nothing else, because for one thing, this vastly reduces the risk of things not getting done. If you are sharing the work among a lot of different teams, obviously the advantage is that you don't have to kind of put aside a whole team for a really long time to focus on the migration, but it does take a lot longer, because teams have their own planning cycles, they have their own priorities and their own goals, and you're asking them to do this thing instead. And the bigger your organization gets, the more complicated this becomes. And if you are centralizing the work in one team, you can just do it for them. So in our case, we did the work among the teams that had web developers in. And at the start, it was just some web developers doing it on the side of their team goals. And we knew that it was probably going to take a while. So how should you tackle the work itself? Should you do it all at once, or should you go step by step? If you're doing the work shared across multiple teams, you don't really have much of a choice. You have to do it incrementally. But if you do have the luxury of a dedicated team doing the whole migration, you do have a choice here. Things like major version upgrades of libraries like React do need to be done in one go, because you can't have multiple versions running in the same app. If you're working on something like replatforming a site onto a new static site generator, you might decide to do it all at once so you don't have to mess around with, say, multiple build steps. If you've got a smaller code base, there's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't do it all at once, but big bang migrations are, yes, quicker sometimes, but a lot riskier if your code base is big like ours. And if there's an incident, it makes it a lot easier to identify what's gone wrong and roll it back if you've gone incrementally. It's a much safer approach. So in our monorepo, all of our apps are React. Some of them have Next.js. Previously, all of them were using Flow. And we have these shared libraries in the monorepo where changes to those libraries could affect multiple apps and even parts of the same app. And we knew we couldn't afford to just migrate the entirety of our customer service app and just throw it into production when, our ability to help our customers depends on it being up and running. So we knew we had to be diligent, we'd have to test things very carefully, and we'd have to go step by step. The flip side of this is that you have to be very disciplined and make sure that you actually keep going. It can be very challenging to maintain enthusiasm and pace, as we very much discovered. And there's a real risk here that you go bit by bit, then something else comes up, and you put it on pause, but you actually never resume it. Of course, like with any migration, we hit a bend in the road pretty soon. We found that when people were contributing to the repo, they would copy and paste old flow packages to create new ones, while we were trying to kind of get the amount of flow code down in the repository. So we needed to make it much easier for them to build new things in TypeScript, so easy that it was the only option. And we did that with tooling. We wrote a package generator that would bootstrap a TypeScript library or a component with all of the things you could possibly need. It removed a lot of the manual steps that engineers were struggling with, and it meant that the new things coming in were all TypeScript. It was definitely the path of least resistance. We could have also added some static checks here, so things like semgrep are really useful to fail your CI pipeline and block deployments and merges if someone does something you don't like, or say that you're preventing people from using, say, moment and replacing it with another date library. You can use something like ESLint to prevent those imports from being added. I really cannot overstate the importance of tooling in a migration, and I know there's another talk about this tomorrow, which will go into that in a little more detail. But ultimately, if we'd done it all manually, it would have taken us twice as long. So after running the migration script, we would give the output a manual look over to fix any NEs and any outstanding type errors. And my team documented it meticulously because they're very good people. And we also had a space on this page for documenting any errors or issues that people had come across using the tooling and workarounds for those as well, which was super useful. Our migration script also generated flow types for the packages that we'd just migrated, so that any other apps that hadn't yet been migrated would still have valid types for those imported packages. Now, the shared libraries in our mono repo are kind of in a bit of a tangled web of dependencies, whereas some libraries have dependencies on other libraries, which have dependencies on other libraries. And so you kind of end up with this tree of dependencies. And we didn't want to be in a position where we'd migrate a package to TypeScript only to find that it depended on packages that were still flow, because then it wouldn't have types. So we wrote a script to find packages that were ready to migrate because all of their dependencies had been already migrated to TypeScript. And then we kind of migrate that one and unlock packages further down the tree. Now, especially with an incremental migration like this, it became really important to measure our progress, not only to keep morale up, but also that we could see how close we were, or how close we weren't, to actually finishing. I put together a dashboard that showed the number of flow packages in the repo versus the number of TypeScript packages, and it was a very exciting day when those lines finally crossed over. I also wrote another script based on the which packages are ready to migrate script, and that gave me a percentage of the files that had been migrated, and I posted that in Slack every month. And towards the end of the migration, I also posted it every time the percentage changed as well. Along with those measurements, you need milestones, which are checkpoints along the way that indicate significant achievements in your migration. And setting milestones not only made us feel like we were getting somewhere, but it also helped us to communicate our progress to stakeholders in terms that they could easily understand. So the first app we migrated was a milestone, migrating our web app was another one, and migrating our customer service app, which was by far the biggest app in our repo, was the final one. And if you're not setting milestones like this for any projects, I really recommend it because it really helps to break down a massive project into much more easily digestible chunks. Unfortunately, another bend in the road showed up around mid-2023. By this point, we had the entire web discipline working on this on the side, but we were still quite a long way from the end, and we'd hoped to get it done by the end of 2023, but it really wasn't looking likely. Now, at Monzo, we try and foster an environment where web engineers have the capacity to take on what we call discipline work, so web maintenance and web improvement work, improving our tooling, doing package upgrades on the side. So they'll come along to their weekly planning and say, oh, I'm also doing this week. But ultimately, when you have external deadlines and there's a lot going on, then it can be quite hard to prioritize this work. So either way, things were moving very slowly, and it really seemed like there was a risk we wouldn't finish at all. So we'd been roughly aiming for the end of the year, but with the support of my engineering director, I turned this into a hard deadline. Right? We had to do this by the end of the year so that we could be done with it and move on with our lives. So I ticketed up the remaining work. I broke down the customer service app into tickets and assigned them to teams based on the teams that owned various parts of the system. And then we got buy-in from the engineering managers and the tech leads of the teams who had web engineers to make sure that they brought these tickets into their planning every week. And every month, I counted up the tickets that were remaining for each team, posted an update with our progress, made sure to celebrate the teams who'd done the most, and also gave that all-important percentage figure. We also reduced the scope of the migration a bit so that we wouldn't have to migrate every single app to consider it done, only the ones that were worked on the most. And this is a big compromise, right? It meant that not everything, 100% of our repo would be in TypeScript, but these last few apps rarely get touched, and we figured that people would migrate them as and when they needed to. We did also wonder if we could just strip out Flow completely. After all, like, if it's just JavaScript, you don't need to transpile it, so we could take Babel out, and we could use the new compiler. But then we thought, okay, what do we need to actually do that? Well, we need to run a code mod to take out Flow, and then we need to check over it for any errors. We might as well just migrate it to TypeScript. Now, we didn't have to get particular buy-in from senior leaders for quite a long time because, as I mentioned at Monzo, there is this expectation that we have this improvement work on the side, but for a long time it was just a small group of web engineers doing bits here and there. But getting buy-in became really important once we'd proven the value of the migration, and it was obvious that things were going really slowly, and we knew that we had to get things done. And without the backing of senior stakeholders, there was a risk that the work would never be deemed important enough to actually finish. And my eng director was a brilliant support here, and with his backing, other less technical leaders in the organization were much more likely to let us get on with it. It definitely helps you if you know what stakeholders care the most about. Some of them will be focused on risk, like what's the danger if you don't do the migration? Others will care more about things like scale or developer velocity. So is being on an old version of something making it harder for you to ship? Or is it holding you back from scaling your organization? Know who you're pitching to and make sure you tailor your argument. Stakeholders will also want to know when you'll see the benefits from all of this hard work. And with some migrations, it really is 0 to 1. You don't see that value until it's completely done. And for much of the TypeScript stuff, that was the case, right? So we could migrate 99% of our code in an app to TypeScript. But for as long as there was any Flow code left in the app, we'd still need Babel, and so we wouldn't be able to use the new compiler. But there was a small amount of incremental value, as it turned out. So all of the new stuff was TypeScript, so that means when we were building new features, we got to enjoy the benefits of working in TypeScript. The documentation was a lot better, our IDEs worked a bit faster, and we were able to upgrade some of our libraries, like Apollo client, a lot sooner than we anticipated. In my opinion, the greatest threat to any migration is not its complexity, it's actually changing organizational priorities that leave you unable to finish. Make sure that the people in charge understand the risks of not completing the migration. It's easy to think that you can just pause it and carry on, but in some cases, you'll actually end up in a worse place than you were when you started. I'm legally obliged to include this comic from XKCD about standards here. Ultimately, you might introduce one new technology to replace everything else, but if you don't finish it, it'll just be one more new technology in your code base. Maybe you'll do a little bit, and then you'll need to focus on something else, and then somebody else will come along, and they'll add another new technology to the code base. Or maybe you've got a lot of different teams working on different parts of the same app, and you're all using slightly different approaches and different libraries. And it's also very common after mergers and takeovers where the other company's systems and code bases get combined into the parent companies, and you end up with a lot of different tech stacks. When there are 5 different ways of doing something in your code base, how is an engineer supposed to know which one is the right one? And what's their motivation to update the old stuff and replace it with the new stuff if there's still a ton of the old stuff? And if somebody is paged for an incident, and this particular part of your website uses some obscure data fetching library, when the rest of the website uses something else, like, what are they going to do? And also, we are web developers, most of us. Like, think about the end user as well. If you're adding a new library or package, like, is this increasing the bundle size that the user then has to download at the other end? You're also much more likely to get buy-in if you've proven you've given a lot of thought to the safety of the migration. So minimizing disruption to operations, not inconveniencing people too much, and having an escape plan. Because any migration comes with risk. The important thing is how you deal with that risk and prepare yourself for what can go wrong. Incidents happen, that's fine. They are an inevitable consequence of doing work and moving forward, and we shouldn't be ashamed or afraid of incidents. Except that you probably will have some incidents when you're migrating things, that's fine. The important thing is that you can recover from them quickly and safely and learn from them so they don't happen again. And we absolutely had some bugs that came out from our migrations and some reasons that we had to roll back, but we were able to do that quickly, fix the bug, and then move forward again. Just like growing out a bad haircut, there's probably going to be a really awkward in-between phase where you'll have the old and the new technologies running alongside each other. You'll have to maintain both of them and make changes to both of them. But you might also have to accept some temporary slowdowns in processes, like additional build steps. So for a long time, we were running both Flow and TypeScript in our build pipeline, which, negligible though it was, it did add a few seconds onto every build. Keep on going, and eventually you'll get to the point where you can turn off the old system. And we did it. In December 2023, I was running the migration stat script more and more frequently to see the numbers ticking up, 97, 98, 99, and I PR'd a change towards Christmas that was just the remaining flow files in the main app. And that script never did get to 100 because I got it to count the config files as well. That was my bad. But it was worth it, right? The new compiler was faster in both development and CI. We were able to upgrade those packages sooner than we'd hoped. Rather concerningly, we found quite a lot of type errors where Flow had just completely ignored actual missing parameters and props. Fun, but we fixed those. And yeah, VS Code, which is most of our editor of choice, was a lot faster. And no more crashing server as well. So when you do finish, make sure you celebrate your successes as well, because it's not an easy task, and it can take a really long time, as it certainly did in our case. So recognize everybody who contributed and saw it through with you. My personal favorite is to publicly embarrass people, so I posted a message in a public forum. This was our company-wide engineering announcements channel. I wanted to make sure that engineering leadership knew that what we'd achieved as a group. We also got stickers made. Everyone loves a sticker to show they took part in something. If there isn't a sticker, did it really happen? I also got some little cakes made with TypeScript cake toppers. And that is a story of how we migrated to TypeScript. Now it's time for yours. Let's think about your next migration. So when a migration opportunity presents itself, here are some things to think about before you take the leap. This should always be the first question that you ask yourself. Do you even need to do this migration at all? Think about it, right? As time goes on, if you don't do this migration, will you be in the same place or a worse place? Because if you'll be in a worse place, then yes, you should probably do something about that. But if nothing will change, if you don't do anything, I would encourage you to think very carefully about why you want to do this. The decision to introduce a new technology needs to be very well considered. So you need to have a really clear idea of the benefits that you're expecting to get from it, because all benefits are relative to the effort required to actually do the migration. And it's always more effort than you think it will be. Is there a point at which the effort outweighs the value? And this gets more of an issue the larger your code base gets and the more complex your organization gets as well. Remember that technology is not free once you've implemented it, right? You've got to think about maintenance as well. Who's going to look after the new technology? And this includes staying on top of vulnerabilities, right? Being on call, if that's relevant. Major version upgrades, debugging when things go wrong, answering engineers' questions on how to use it. Make sure you don't just expect to hand it over to a platform team or infrastructure team and expect them to magically know how to look after it. If you started a brand new project today and you choose this new technology to build your code base in, you know full well that you'll be going through the exact same thing a few years down the line with whatever new thing there is, because there's always going to be new technologies, just in the same way that all code becomes legacy code once you merge it into the main branch. You don't have to do a migration every single time something new comes out. So think very carefully about your motivations. For example, there's a vast difference between picking a new tool because it seems cool and picking a new tool because it's genuinely going to be better than what you already have. Many of us have built horrible workarounds and very complex functionality that have been replaced by much better packages that somebody else has written that do exactly what we want them to do. Great, brilliant. Things become end of life as well, so we might put off major version upgrades of things because we're quite intimidated by the amount of work that's required. But it becomes a necessity at the point at which the library is not going to be updated anymore, and you start being at risk of security vulnerabilities. And things that seemed like a good idea at the time might end up being a poor decision. Many of us will have bet on the wrong horse when it comes to technology, and for us, Flow was unfortunately one of those decisions. We made a choice in the past, it made sense at the time, it turned out not to have been the right one. We certainly weren't the only ones to make that decision, and these things happen. And as well as a lot of good reasons to do a migration, there are plenty of poorly advised reasons to do a migration as well. Sometimes companies might migrate to new technologies because it seems like that's what everyone's doing right now. Don't assume that just because a well-respected tech company is using a particular technology that you should too. When everyone was adopting React, I wonder how many of them stopped to think about whether they actually needed something that was built for a Facebook-scale application. We use it at Monzo internally for our customer service application, but that's a really massive app and it has a lot of contributors, and I think it's actually a really good use case. But if you've got a static website, how much of it is just excess JavaScript that you're sending down the wire? Think about that end user. Maybe you joined a new company and you don't like it, or you came onto a new project where they're using some kind of tool or library that you don't like or you aren't familiar with. I was given some good advice by my boss at a new job once when I said I didn't like a library that they'd chosen. He said, think about whether it is actually worse or whether it's just different from what you've used before. Live with it for a while and see how you get on. In my case, I do think it was worse, and I was right. But the principle is a really good one. That's the important bit. Is it actually worse, or are you just not used to it? And by not opening your mind to new technologies from the ones that you've used before, are you holding yourself back? And even if that new technology is better, right, do you really have a good plan for how you're going to replace it? Does it make sense for this company that you've just joined or this project that you've just joined to take the time to do a migration right now? And maybe there's a new language you've been playing with in your spare time and you wish you could use all the time. Or maybe there's massive hype around a new technology and it seems like it would be good for some reason or another. There are so many new libraries and frameworks out there, and it is exhausting trying to keep up. Many of these new technologies will come and go before you've even had a chance to try them out. It's really important to consider whether a technology is actually better than what you've got now. And there's nothing wrong with boring, okay? Boring works. Boring is tried and tested, and boring is easier to maintain. This is an excerpt from an essay called Choose Boring Technology by Dan McKinley, and you can read the whole thing at boringtechnology.club. Boring should not be conflated with bad. There's technology out there that is both boring and bad. You should not use any of that. But there are many choices of technology that are boring and good, or at least good enough. MySQL is boring. Postgres is boring. PHP is boring, Python is boring, memcached is boring, cron is boring. These technologies, boring though they might be, are familiar and reliable, and people know how to use them, and there's lots of documentation. They're well maintained. And sure, they're not new and exciting, but I've lost my notes. But they will work, and they'll do what you need them to do. I'm not telling you to use PHP, by the way, but I do wonder what those technologies would be if this article was written again today. But the principle stands. So I hope these lessons will give you a framework to tackle your next migration. And remember, if you do a migration, do it wisely. Don't be afraid to be boring, and maybe you don't even need to do it at all. Thank you very much.